Alto has a unique story in the Bay Area for the role that African Americans played in its history. St. Francis of Assisi Parish, with its largely African American membership, was a key player in the development of the city. When East Palo Alto was incorporated in 1982 after a fierce political battle, its city council was primarily African American, as was its mayor, Barbara Mouton, who was a parishioner of St. Francis of Assisi. Because the history of East Palo Alto and St. Francis of Assisi Parish are so interconnected, we spoke with the pastor, Father Larry Goody, and some of the African American leaders from the church and the community to learn about the role that African American Catholics played in creating the municipality of East Palo Alto.
My name is Martha Goodwill Murray Hanks, and I have been a member of St. Francis of Assisi for 63 years. I moved here from Louisiana at the age of 10. I'm involved in a lot of activities at St. Francis Church and throughout the East Palo Alto community. I'm also a retired educator.
I'm Stuart Highland. I was married here in this church in 1984 and have been a member in spirit. Became a Catholic in 2018 and served in St. Vincent de Paul. I'm a Vincentian. I'm also a native of St. Peter Claver and have been involved with a lot of community activities that St. Francis Church has supported. So I'm really grateful to be a part of this community, this Catholic community.
I'm Deacon Lewis Dixon. Been here at St. Francis over 50 years, been ordained 30, and I plan on being here another 100 years, if possible. No, just kidding. As long as the Lord wants me to be here.
Yeah, I'm Verna Winston, and I've been coming to this church since it opened since 1954, and I used to come from the city and visit, and then I decided to move here.
I really didn't know the story of the incorporation or what had taken place, and I'm just now, as time goes on, I'm appreciating. I mean, in fact, I kind of have a feeling if it wasn't for incorporation as a city, we probably wouldn't be here right now, and the church was very much a part of that.
The Second Great Migration started during World War II and continued until the late 1970s. During this time, millions of African Americans moved from the South to other parts of the United States. Some left to escape the discriminatory Jim Crow laws, some to seek employment opportunities. Migration trends often followed the railroad lines. Therefore, many people from Texas and Louisiana ended up in California. In the midst of this, St. Francis of Assisi Parish in East Palo Alto was founded in 1951. After its founding, East Palo Alto became progressively more African American due to housing policies that directed them to the area. While California may not have had the overt segregation that was seen in the South, there were still a variety of racist policies which directed African Americans to live in certain areas. One such tactic was blockbusting, in which real estate agents would exploit the fears of white homeowners when African American families began moving into the area. They would try to convince the white residents to sell by claiming that their property values would soon go down, and if they did, the agents would turn around and sell the houses to black buyers at inflated prices. One area affected by these policies was East Palo Alto. A house was sold to an African American buyer in a previously all-white neighborhood in 1954. And by the 1960 census, the area was 82% black.
Basically, it was a city that was created by the real estate people who told you where you could live, where you couldn't live, and they were told they couldn't live over here, over there, but they could live here in East Palo Alto. And also Bellhaven of Menlo Park. And there was lots of our parishioners. We also include that part of Menlo Park.
Yeah, so what happened was when we moved here, like I said, the majority was Caucasian. And so people were starting to be told that you're going to have all of these black people moving in, the neighborhood's going to go down. And so whites started moving out. And This was the only part of the unincorporated city where they were, when African Americans were coming into, this is the place where they wanted them to buy. So they wanted us all in one spot.
Like from HP to
Yeah.
East Palo Alto.
Because they weren't going to let us live in Palo Alto, or Menlo Park even for that matter.
A lot of the people were moving in were service people who had retired had left the service and now were looking to establish themselves.
One such person was Carl Clark, a St. Francis parishioner and World War II veteran. During his time in the Navy, his ship, the USS Aaron Ward, came under attack. He put out multiple fires and rescued a number of his shipmates, breaking his collarbone in the process.
So he saved his ship during World War II from exploding because there was fire all around and the fire was getting to the munitions, and he kind of single-handedly held the hose, which is designed for maybe 3 or 4 guys because it's a high-pressure hose.
About 3.
Carl Clark actually received his medal, what was it, 40 years later?
Yeah.
Maybe 50 years later.
He finally got a reward for it. Took him many years and to get recognition, but he actually saved a ship, and the commanding officer told him that.
And when he came to Menlo Park, he tells the story about, they talked about blockbusting, right? Mm-hmm. Because he was the first black person to move in there, and he remembers carrying his stuff in.
So he was telling me when he arrived, there was a group of people across the street looking at him, the white folk, and obviously not happy to see an African American moving in to their neighborhood. And finally he went over and talked to them, and he said, "I just got back from fighting a war. I didn't expect to have to fight another war over here."
As time went on, many residents became concerned about the lack of voice they had in the decisions that were being made, as East Palo Alto was still an unincorporated area. They faced issues such as relying on the San Mateo County Sheriff instead of having their own police force. They also lost some of their land, as it was absorbed by the neighboring towns. Incorporation efforts had happened several times before, but this time it was successful.
It was under the county, I guess, up until 1982, and then it became it became a separate city.
That was a time in our city when there was a lot of division amongst people who were once really close friends in terms of whether or not we should become a city. I guess the people for incorporation wanted us to be a city so that we could have a right to decide for ourselves what we wanted, because at the time, before incorporation, we were part of San Mateo County. And the county sold off parts of what's now the Palo Alto Airport. All of that once belonged to East Palo Alto. So they were just selling off different parts of the unincorporated East Palo Alto.
There was some land grabbing, though, at the time when because East Palo Alto took in Palo Alto, part of Palo Alto over. There's a golf course over here and an airport that got taken over by Palo Alto. Was not part of Palo Alto until they did the dividing up and everything. And same thing happened in Menlo Park. Parts that are Menlo Park today actually were East Palo Alto.
So
Yeah.
East Palo Alto got annexed out. Luckily, we was left with 2 square miles,
Yeah.
because it was eventually,
Gonna be
it would
non-existent.
have been just straight up just Palo Alto.
And so there were people who believed that we could make our own destiny, and we would be able to survive as a city. The other proponents, some of the things they were thinking was that because we were such a large, there was such a large group of African Americans here, that they thought that if we became a city, we would be condoning, segregation. And then the other thing is they didn't think that we could govern ourselves. So we became a city.
And so as it turned out, first mayor of East Palo Alto was from our church, was Barbara Mouton, African American from Louisiana, and I think it was because Catholics had education. They came with education from Louisiana, many of them, and so I think they had a feeling that they could make the city work and so on, and so that confidence, and that was probably the difference. And then some of the others didn't have that education and didn't think they could.
East Palo Alto, and this is something that's not known as well, we had per capita the most black PhDs in the city. So there was a really strong education bent here in this city as well. So that self-determination went around education and building for our future.
Members of St. Francis Parish were very active in the incorporation process, and the parish itself often opened its doors to those involved in the effort.
Definitely, members of our parish, we were very, active in incorporation. And then a lot of the meetings occurred here. St. Francis has always opened its arms to any denominations, to come and to meet here in our church and in our hall.
I was told at one of the meetings I was at by one of the leaders of the incorporation, who was an African American, but he came up to me one day and he said, "I've always wondered why the Catholics seemed to be more in favor of incorporation than the Protestants." And he said, whenever we go to a meeting, we come back and we always go into the church and pray.
And so I'm not sure what we were able to do here at St. Francis with our local organizing committee could have been done in any other church in East Palo Alto, at least not then. So we certainly tried to reach out, but we were able to work across the table for our common concerns around the community. And this church is really like the only church I can think of in East Palo Alto to do it. I mean, there's plenty of churches that are doing things on their own or doing some things for part of the community, but not so thoughtful and deliberate in the way that we've done it here. I mean, we really make up our mind to work together.
Social action has always been a part of the parish's identity over the years. Priests and parishioners have led many efforts to address needs in the community.
So this church has played a huge role in just about everything I can think of in terms of education, us becoming a city, and kind of like keeping us together, keeping the city together, keeping folks together, because like I mentioned earlier, we're open,
They started a job training program, and came out of St. Francis. Father Sweeney was the pastor here, not the pastor, but associate pastor. And he heard about this program back in Philadelphia. He went back and checked it out, came back and started the second one in the country. And they they still exist. They go by the name of Job Train now, but it was OICW before. And so when he retired from Santa Clara, he started the Shrine at Our Lady of Peace. We're good friends. I invited him to come back here and to stay here, but he had a chance to see again how this had developed and how many people were helped by his program, and they started the St. Vincent de Paul Society here, and it was a tremendous St. Vincent de Paul Society. They followed everything was done exactly the way it was supposed to be done. I don't think I've ever seen a St. Vincent de Paul Society as well organized as they had here.
I've been a Vincentian, I guess, 30 years or more. Yeah, more than that, because I used St. Vincent de Paul as my field ministry when I was going through formation for the diaconate. And from that point on, I continued on. And still today, I was still a volunteer.
The community, as far as St. Vincent de Paul, we've been taking care of people, their rent and their PG&E, and their needs,
And we had so many volunteers because we actually kept the food here in the church. We had it, and And finally, Mr. Stevenson had convinced them to build a food pantry on the other side of the rectory. And now we have two large pantries over there and, feed the people. And so we're still providing food and helping with rent and utilities.
Another important group at the parish is the Knights of St. Peter Claver, a fraternal Catholic organization that was formed when African Americans were not allowed to join other groups.
Yeah.
I'd like to just say a little bit about the Knights of St. Peter Claver. It was started as a black organization in 1909 by 4 Josephite priests and some other members of a church, because at that time we were not able to join the Knights of Columbus. And so we've been around for over 100 years. We're all over the United States and international. We have members that are international. So we reach out to the communities and just do an abundance of work. And we're also diverse. We're not just African Americans. We welcome anyone to join our organization. So I just thought I'd mention that, because a lot of Catholics have not heard of us.
The town has faced challenges over the years, including a time in the early 90s when it was known as the murder capital of the country. Although gang wars, drug sales, and homicides were normal occurrences during this time, parish members and community activists remained active in opposing those who would make the community less safe.
I mean, I had bullets come through my house. I'm just during that whole trial, that whole period of time, I had students who were murdered. My own godson, who was 20 years old, was shot and killed 20 times. And so it was a real experience just living in East Palo Alto during that time.
We, the church members and the local citizens, we got together, and like I said, we went to all the sites where it was known to sell drugs, and we stand there, and I had no fear at all. I know God was with me, and by us being strong, they had to leave. They stopped the drug selling, along with when they did the raid, and they knew all the hot spots, and so that cleared it up.
So in Deacon Dixon's story about the hard hats, those folks were wearing like white T-shirts that said "Down with dope and up with hope." And when those white T-shirts came and they had on like their construction hard hats, they would be standing on the street corners, and if folks wanted to purchase some drugs or something, it's like, hey, why are you coming in our community to do this? Holding people responsible. It wasn't like we were trying to push people away, but we were questioning, their ethics, because those folks in the cars weren't just black and brown folks coming by that stuff.
Right.
So it was really good about the holding folks accountable for what they're going to do and saying, I'll be a witness on behalf of this community.
Today, East Palo Alto faces new challenges in a region that has become Silicon Valley. The high cost of living, especially in housing, is a struggle for those in an area that is still less affluent than its neighbors. The city's identity continues to evolve. In 2019, the population was about 66% Hispanic, 14% African American, and 38% white, with smaller populations of Pacific Islanders and other groups. Many of the city's leaders are still African American.
So it's a challenge for people to be able to live here close to their work, and also and now in an area that's become desirable, but not desirable. I think when I arrived here, and now it's become desirable. The weather, close to the freeway, and close to work and so on.
Some of these people who are now adults who've returned said that they can't afford to live here because it's so expensive. So that's something that we're working on.
Through these changes, the parish has made an effort to include all members of the community and celebrate the traditions of everyone.
When I first got here, we decided we wanted to have something that would respond to the Hispanic community. and so we started posadas, and then around Christmas time we started um, out in the streets. So every neighborhood had a posada going on, and that was a sort of a preparation for Christmas. Joseph and Mary looking for a place for the child Jesus to be born. But after a while, we had African American Mary and Jesus, and we had a Tongan Mary and Jesus. So we tried to open it up to the whole community, so it wasn't just a Hispanic thing.
So this has just been a great place for folks to grow their families and nurture. And it definitely has a history, a rich history. Black folks have a big part of it, but we're a multicultural church. We really are a universal church.
Our community is rather, it's unique because it is, I think there are 50-something churches, African American churches, and only one Catholic church, which includes African American, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic.
I think that, when you talk about diversity, our church is probably the most diverse of
It
any
is.
other church that I've been to.
Yep.
Yeah, we have 53 churches here in East Palo Alto, and ours is the only one that's diverse. I mean, we have the whole makeup of the city.
It's great. It's a great place to live in. I've been here since 54, and I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere.
I think it's important that everyone, knows that St. Francis is really open. We're loving people, and all are welcome to come.